The first thing they threw was a walnut. It skipped off the toe of his black boot and rolled away under the railings, and the three young men laughed as though they had done something clever. I was close enough to hear the shell crack against the leather. I have roasted chestnuts at the Lion Gate of Harrogate for the better part of 40 winters, and in that time I have seen every manner of fool test himself against a man who is not allowed to answer. But I remember that walnut. I remember it because it was the first small cruelty of a night that the whole city has told and retold ever since, and because everything that mattered afterward began with a boy at a high window who saw it too. Let me tell it the way it happened, so you understand the size of what a child did. It was Lantern Eve, the night in autumn when the folk of the lower town carry paper lamps up the hill and set them along the palace wall until the whole forecourt glows amber. The crown gives out honey cakes at the small door, the fiddlers play under the arch, the fountains are lit. It is the one night of the year the ordinary and the royal breathe the same cold air. I had my brazier going, chestnuts turning, coppers rattling in my apron, and the crowd was thick and merry and in places too deep in the barrel wine that the vintners sell cheap by the cup. The guardsman on the near post that night was Doran Vale. You would have picked him out of 100, not because he was the tallest, he was not, but because of the stillness in him. Most of the young ones on the wall fidget when they think no one is watching. They shift their weight, they let their eyes wander to a pretty girl or a spilled cup. Doran did none of it. He stood on the low stone plinth beside the gate with his rifle at his shoulder and his white gloves crossed just so, his tall black bearskin catching the lamplight, and he might have been carved there when the palace was built. His eyes went forward and stayed forward. If a moth landed on his cheek, he let it sit. That was the discipline of him, and it was not coldness. I had known Doran since he was a lad no bigger than my chestnut sack, and I can tell you there was more warmth banked inside that man than in my whole brazier. He simply kept it where duty put it. His father had stood the same post. Aldous Vale, a name the older guardsmen still say quietly, the way you say the name of a man who was better than you. Aldous had died on the wall the winter the west stables burned, gone back into the smoke twice to carry out the king's grooms and a third time and not come out. Doran was 9 years old that winter. He had grown up on the story the way other boys grow up on fairy tales, and when he came of age he asked for his father's post and no other, and the captain gave it to him because the boy had earned the right to ask. So when Doran stood so very still, it was not only orders that held him. It was his father's shadow, and the promise a 9-year-old had made at a graveside that he would be worthy of the coat. A man carries a thing like that the way he carries his own spine. You do not see it, but it is what keeps him upright. I knew all this about Doran Vale better than most, because I had watched him grow into it. The winter his father died I was already an old fixture at the gate, and I remember the 9-year-old Doran being brought up the hill in a borrowed coat too big for him to stand at the graveside, white to the lips, not crying, holding himself so terribly still even then that it frightened me more than tears would have. And in the hard years after, when his mother took in sewing and there was not always a supper waiting, that boy used to come and sit by my brazier on the cold evenings, and I would press a paper of chestnuts into his hands and pretend I had roasted too many and could not sell them, and he would eat them slow to make them last, and watch the guardsman on the wall with a hunger in his face that had nothing to do with the chestnuts. He was not watching them the way other boys watched, dreaming of the fine red coat and the tall fur hat. He was studying them, learning the stillness. Practicing, I came to understand. For a post he had already decided in his 9-year-old heart he would one day hold, because it was his father's, and because holding it perfectly was the only way he knew to keep his father from being altogether gone. So when I tell you that Doran Vale would sooner have died than break on that plinth, I am not reaching for a fine phrase. I mean it the way you mean a thing you have watched take root over 20 years. That stillness was not given to him with the coat. He had built it, splinter by splinter, out of grief and love and a boy's fierce promise, all through a cold childhood by an old woman's fire, and 3 drunk men with a jug of barrel wine had decided to make an evening sport of tearing it down for a silver piece, because they took the finished thing for something cheap, the way people always take a finished thing for something cheap when they never saw the cost of the making. That is why I could not turn my chestnuts and wait it out, not really, though I pretended to. Every walnut they threw at the boy I had fed by my fire. I just did not yet know what to do about it, any more than the rest of that crowd did. It would take someone younger than all of us and smaller than all of us to know. Now the 3 young men. The one who threw the walnut was a broad, fair fellow named Garrick Stole, the son of a grain factor who had grown rich selling to the palace kitchens and richer selling to the army, and who had raised his boy to believe that coin was a kind of blood. Garrick had come up the hill with 2 friends of the same stripe, a lean, sharp one they called Pell, and a heavy, slow-laughing one named Torin, and the 3 of them had been at the barrel wine since the fountains were lit. They were not wicked men, I want you to understand that. If you had met Garrick Stole sober at his father's counting house, he would have weighed out your grain fairly and wished you good day. But wine and a crowd, and a young man's need to be seen had scoured all of that off him, and what was left was the ugly thing that lives at the bottom of a certain kind of pride, the itch to make another man flinch, and to be admired for it. They had found their sport, and their sport was Doran. "Look at it," Garrick said loud to the ring of onlookers he was already gathering. "A grown man dressed up like a toy off a shelf, painted soldier." He waved his cup. "Say something, painted soldier. Wish us a good lantern eve." Doran said nothing. He looked forward. The lamplight moved on the brass of his buttons. "He can't," said Pell, delighted. "They cut their tongues out when they take the coat. Everybody knows it." "Is that true?" Torin asked, half believing it, and the crowd laughed, and Garrick swelled with the laughter the way a sail fills, and threw the walnut. "I have seen this 100 times, as I said. Usually it burns itself out. A drunk shouts himself hoarse, the guard outlasts him, the crowd tires of a man who will not give them a show, and they drift off to the fiddlers. I expected that. I turned my chestnuts and waited for it to pass. It did not pass, because Garrick Stole had an audience, and an audience is the wind that a small fire needs. Up above all of this, and this is the part I only learned later, pieced together from the boy himself and from the nurse who could not hold him. A window stood open on the 2nd floor of the gatehouse wing, and behind it, in his nightshirt, with his knees on the cold stone sill, knelt Prince Torin. He was 11 years old that autumn, the 2nd child of the Crown Prince Rowan and the Princess Alara, grandson of old King Alaric, and by every account I ever heard the sort of boy who could not sleep on a festival night if you chained him to the bed. His nurse had put out the candle an hour before. Torin had waited for her tread to fade, and then gone straight to the window to watch the lanterns, the way any boy would. He had his little sister Malin's shawl round his shoulders against the draught and his own carved wooden knight in his fist, a battered toy, the paint worn off its shield, that he carried the way some children carry a habit. And from that high window, over the noise of the fiddles, he heard the crowd laughing at the gate, and he looked down, and he saw the walnut thrown at Doran Vale. He knew Doran. That is the thread you must hold onto through all of this. 2 winters before, at another fair, a much smaller Torin had let go of his nurse's hand in the press of the crowd and been swallowed up in it, and had wandered, lost and terrified, right to the foot of the wall, and a guardsman had broken the first rule of his post to crouch down, out of his rigid stance, and speak low to a frightened child until the nurse came running. That guardsman had picked the boy's dropped wooden knight out of the gutter, wiped the mud from its little shield with his own white glove and pressed it back into Torin's hands, and had said, "A knight does not run, your highness. He stands his ground and waits for his own. Can you do that for me?" And Torin had stood his ground, sniffling, gripping the toy until his people found him. He had never forgotten it. He had asked his nurse the guardsman's name, and kept it. It was the reason he carried that particular night to that particular window on that particular night. So when Prince Torin looked down from the gatehouse and saw 3 drunk men closing in a laughing ring around Doran Vale, he did not see a painted soldier. He saw the man who had knelt in the mud for him and told him how to be brave. And he saw that the man could not be brave back, could not answer, could not lift a hand, was, by the whole weight of his own honor, forbidden to defend himself. That is a terrible thing for a child to understand all at once, that goodness can be bound, that the strongest man at the gate was the one least able to protect himself. Torin knelt there with the shawl slipping off his shoulder and the cold stone under his knees and watched, and something in him that would matter a great deal before the night was out began, very quietly, to set itself like a bone. Down at the gate it was getting worse. Garrick had discovered that the crowd would give him more the further he went, and so he went further. He stepped up onto the edge of the plinth, the low stone that Doran stood upon, so that he was almost nose to nose with him, and he blew a long breath of wine-sour air into the guardsman's face. "Nothing," he said, "truly nothing. I could pour this cup over your head and you'd stand there and take it, wouldn't you?" He tilted the cup so the wine trembled at the lip. "Wouldn't you?" I put down my roasting pan. I am an old woman and I have no standing to order a rich man's son about, but I have a loud voice when I want one, and I called out, "Leave the lad be, Garrick stole. Your father would box your ears." A few near me murmured the same, but there were more who laughed, and a young man drunk on wine and applause hears only the laughter. Garrick did not even look at me. "He's not a lad, Nan," he called back, playing to the ring. "He's furniture. Aren't you furniture?" And he reached up with 2 fingers and flicked the chin strap of Doran's bearskin hard so it snapped against the underside of his jaw. I saw Doran's throat move. One swallow, that was all. His eyes stayed forward. But I had known him since he was small, and I knew what that swallow cost, and I knew, the way you know weather, that this was not going to burn itself out. There was something in Garrick Stoll's face that had gone past sport and into a kind of hunger, the hunger of a man who has decided he will make a statue move or die trying, and cannot now back down in front of the crowd he has gathered without shame. The captain of the watch was at the far end of the wall, by the small door, minding the honey cakes and the press of children. Too far to see one guardsman among the lanterns. The other posts stood their own ground. A guardsman does not leave his mark to help another without an order. That is iron law, and every man on that wall knew it and hated it that night. Doran was alone in the middle of a laughing crowd with 3 drunk men closing on him, and no one in the whole bright forecourt able, or allowed, to stand between him and them. No one, that is, except a boy in a nightshirt who was already climbing down off his windowsill. Before I tell you what the boy did, you must sit with the gate a little longer, because the cruelty of that quarter hour is the measure of the courage that answered it. If I hurry past it, you will think what Torin did was easy, and it was the opposite of easy. Garrick had his method now, and his method was patience of the worst kind. He did not strike Doran. A drunk fool who throws a punch at a royal guard is dealt with in a heartbeat. The other posts would close, the captain would come, the man would spend the night in a cold cell and the morning being sick and ashamed, and that would be the end of it. Garrick, for all his wine, was cunning enough to know it, so he never quite struck. He grazed the line and stepped back from it and grazed it again, and every time he did, he looked round at the crowd as if to say, "You see, he does nothing. He is nothing." And the crowd, or the drunken part of it, fed him. He took the paper lantern from Tobin's hand and held its warm glow up close to Doran's face, close enough that the heat must have prickled the man's cheek, and he peered at him like a physician. Is he even breathing? Poke him, Pell. And Pell, giggling, jabbed 2 fingers into Doran's ribs once-twice, testing whether the statue was meat. Doran's jaw tightened by a hair, nothing more. "He is breathing," Garrick announced. "The furniture breathes. What else does the furniture do? Does it dance?" He set his boot against the edge of the plinth and gave it a shove, as if to jostle the man off his footing. Doran took the small lurch through his ankles and his knees and gave none of it back to the crowd. His shoulders never rose. "It doesn't dance," said Pell. "It sings, then. Sing us a song, painted soldier, sing for your supper." Garrick leaned in. "Or is it true they take your tongue? Show us. Open up. Show us the little stump." And he actually reached with the 2 fingers toward the guardsman's mouth. That was the moment the crowd changed. I felt it change. There is a line even a drunk mob will not follow a man across and reaching to pry open another man's jaw for sport, a man who stands there and takes it because his honor forbids him to stop you. That is close to the line. The laughter thinned. Some of the merry ones went quiet and looked at their boots. A woman near me said, "That's enough now, that's not right," and pulled her husband back a step, but no one moved forward. That is the thing about a wrong done in a crowd. Everyone waits for someone else to be the one. The shame is spread so thin across so many that no single soul feels enough of it to act. And having found that the crowd would not stop him, Garrick reached for a bigger game. He sent Tobin off to the vintner's stall, and Tobin came back with a whole jug, and the 3 of them made a wager of it, loud, so everyone could hear the stakes. A silver piece, Garrick announced, to whichever of them could first make the painted soldier break, make him speak, make him laugh, make him flinch, make him do anything at all that a living man does. And they set to it in earnest, taking their turns like boys at a fairground game, and that I think was the cruelest hour of the whole night, because a wager gives cruelty a shape and a purpose, and lets men tell themselves it is only sport. Pell tried tickling, ran a long straw up under the guardsman's jaw and round his ear, patient as a torturer, waiting for the twitch that never came. Tobin, red-faced and giggling, planted himself square in front of Doran and pulled the ugliest faces a grown man ever made, crossing his eyes, lolling his tongue, waggling his ears, the whole clown's kit, close enough that Doran could not have avoided seeing him without shutting his eyes, and shutting his eyes is not permitted either. And Garrick, cleverest and therefore worst, gave up trying to make the man laugh and set about trying to make him grieve, leaned in close by his ear and began to say low, poisonous things, things I could not hear from where I stood but could read plain enough on Doran's face by the way the muscle jumped along his jaw. I learned afterward what sort of things. He had learned somehow, or guessed, that the young guard's father was dead, and he used it. He said the coat was a dead man's coat, and a dead man's post, and that the son was only playing dress-up in his father's shame. He said the father must be glad to be in the ground rather than watch his boy stand there and take a wager like a tavern dog. He hunted for the softest place in the man, and when he found it he pressed. And still Doran held, but I saw the holding change its nature. Up to then it had been the stillness of a man ignoring an annoyance. Now it became the stillness of a man carrying something too heavy to set down in company, and there is a great difference between the two, and every soul who has ever grieved knows it. His eyes went bright and stayed forward. His breath came slow and deliberate, counted. The way you breathe when breathing is the one thing keeping you from breaking. He was not unmoved. He was moved past all bearing, and holding the wall of himself up against it by main strength, alone, while 3 men picked at the mortar. Once an old man in the crowd, a carter, gray and stooped, the sort of quiet, decent soul who is the backbone of any town, could not stand it and stepped forward and said, "Now that's a shameful thing to say to any man, dead father or living. You ought to be whipped." And for a moment I thought the tide might turn on the strength of one honest voice. But Garrick rounded on him and made such loud, clever sport of him. Old fool, toothless watchdog, come to defend the king's furniture. Does it pay you in splinters? That the laughter swung back the drunk man's way, and the poor carter went red and retreated, beaten not by argument but by mockery, which is the only weapon that works on a crowd. And that was the lesson the whole forecourt was quietly teaching itself, minute by minute. That to step forward alone was to be next, and no one wanted to be next, and so the wrong went on because the price of stopping it was to become its new target. I have thought since that this is how nearly every wrong in the world keeps itself going. Not because men are cruel, because they are afraid to be the one. Doran endured it. I want to tell you what that endurance was, because from the outside it can look like weakness, and it was the farthest thing from weakness I have ever watched. He was not empty. He was full to the brim with everything a man feels when he is baited and shamed in front of the whole town, and he was holding all of it inside the shape of his father's discipline, because to let one drop spill was to fail the coat, and to fail the coat was to fail Aldous Vale, and Doran Vale would sooner have died on that plinth than fail his father twice. He held. His eyes went forward over their heads to the dark line of the hill and the little lanterns going up it, and he held. But a man is not stone, whatever the sport says, and I saw the cost gathering in him. His gloved hands, crossed at his rifle, had gone white at the knuckle. A muscle jumped under his eye. And once, only once, his gaze flicked, for less than a breath, up and to the side, toward the gatehouse window where a small pale shape had been kneeling, as if some part of him had felt the boy watching and did not want the boy to see this. As if the one thing left that he could still protect was a child's good opinion of the world, and even that was being taken from him. The window was empty now. The small pale shape was gone. I did not know yet what that meant. I thought the nurse had come and drawn the child from so ugly a sight, and I was glad of it. I did not know that Prince Torin had gone from the sill, not because he had seen enough, but because he had seen too much. That he was at that moment padding barefoot down a servant's stair in the dark, wooden knight in his fist, with no plan in his head at all except the single burning certainty that the man who had once knelt in the mud for him was being hurt, and that he could not stay at a window and watch it happen. Let me tell you about that certainty, because grown men spend it cheaply and children spend it whole. An adult in that palace, seeing what Torin saw, would have done the sensible thing, rung for a servant, sent word to the captain, woken his father. All of it wise, all of it correct, and all of it slow, and slowness was the very thing killing Doran by inches down at the gate. Torin did not have the adult's gift for the sensible middle way, and thank every star over Harrogate that he did not. He had only the child's terrible clarity. That man is good, these men are hurting him, and I am here. The distance from the first fact to the last was, in the boy's heart, no distance at all. He did not weigh his rank or his nightshirt or the crowd or what his grandfather would say. He went. Down at the gate, Garrick's 2 fingers had stopped an inch from Doran's mouth. Even Garrick, at the last, could not quite do it. Some scrap of the fair grain factor's son his father had raised caught his wrist and would not let it close the distance. He turned it into a mockery instead, flicked the guardsman's lip with the back of a fingernail, a small contemptuous tap, and stepped down off the plinth with his arms spread to the crowd like a player taking his bow. "There," he said, "you see what your fine palace guards are made of. Wax, wax and paint. My father pays taxes to dress up scarecrows, and this," he jabbed a thumb back at Doran without looking, "this is what stands between the king and his enemies. God help the king." Some laughed. More did not. And into the space where the laughter faltered, Pell, sharp, restless Pell, who always needed to go one further than his friend, darted up onto the plinth from the other side, snatched at the polished rifle where it rested against Doran's shoulder, and tried to wrench it loose. Now that was over the line, well over it, and it happened fast. A man may endure a walnut and a flicked strap and even fingers at his mouth, because those touch only his pride, and pride is his own to spend. But the rifle is not his. The rifle is the crown's and the post and the trust, and a guardsman who lets his weapon be taken from his hands by a drunk has failed in the one way that cannot be forgiven. Doran's whole body woke. His grip clamped, his shoulder dropped, and for the first time all night the statue moved, not to strike, never to strike, but to keep hold of what was his to keep. He turned into Pell and locked the rifle down against his side with an arm like a bar, and the two of them strained against each other on the narrow stone. the drunk man yanking and cursing and the guardsman silent and immovable, and the crowd sucked in its breath as one. He moved, someone shouted, half in triumph and half in alarm. The soldier moved. And Garrick Stole, seeing his statue come alive at last and not understanding why, did the stupid, dangerous thing that drunk pride always does at exactly the wrong moment. He decided the guardsman had raised a hand against his friend. He bent, snatched up a fallen fence stave from where the fair men had stacked them by the railing, a length of hard wood as long as my arm, and he came up onto the plinth swinging it, roaring, "Get off him! You struck him! You struck a free man, you painted!" He never finished it, and the stave never landed, because a small voice cut clean across the whole roaring gate, high and clear and shaking and absolutely without fear, and it said, "Stop, leave him alone." And every head in that forecourt turned to see a barefoot boy in a nightshirt come running out of the palace shadows, and put himself between the raised stave and Doran Vale. For a moment nobody in that whole bright forecourt breathed. Garrick Stole stood with the fence stave still lifted over his shoulder and a child standing under it, arms flung wide, back pressed to the guardsman's legs, chin tipped up at him. A small boy in a white nightshirt with a girl's shawl slipping off one shoulder and something clutched in his fist, barefoot on the cold stone, shaking so hard I could see it from where I stood and not stepping back, not 1 inch. "Move, boy," Garrick said, but the swing had gone out of his arm. The whine in him was fighting the thing every man is born with that tells him what a raised club and a child under it add up to, and for the length of a breath he honestly did not know which would win. "This is no business of yours. Get away from him and go home to your bed." "No," said Torin. "That single word. I have heard grown ambassadors take 100 words to say less than that boy said with one. He was terrified, his voice cracked on it, but he planted it down between them like a boundary stone, and it did not move. "He hasn't done anything," Torin said. "You've been hurting him, and he hasn't done anything back, and you know why he hasn't. Because he isn't allowed. He's not allowed to stop you, so it isn't brave what you're doing. It's the opposite of brave. You're only doing it because you know he can't do anything." The words tumbled out too fast, high and furious and near to tears, but clear, every one of them clear. "You want him to move. There. He's moving. He's moving to protect me. Are you going to hit him now? Are you going to hit both of us? Go on then. Hit us in front of everybody. Hit the both of us." And he shut his eyes and turned his face away and braced, the way a small body braces for a blow it has decided to take, and he did not run. I will carry the sight of it to my grave. The little squared shoulders, the bare feet, the wooden knight gripped white-knuckled at his side, its worn shield turned outward as though a toy could ward a blow. A boy of 11 who had reasoned it all out from a high window and come down alone and put his own soft body in the only place in the whole forecourt where it might do some good, between a drunk man's club and a good man who was forbidden to duck. Behind him, Doran Vale broke. Not his discipline, his heart. He came off his rigid stance in a rush, the rifle forgotten, Pell forgotten, and got the boy behind him. One white glove spread wide across that small chest to sweep him back and around, putting his own body where the child's had been, his own back to the raised stave. In doing it, he threw away the one thing he had guarded all night at such cost, his stillness, his post, the letter of his orders, and he threw it away without a heartbeat's hesitation the instant the price of keeping it was a child in the path of a club. That is the whole man, if you want to know him. He would take fingers at his mouth for the sake of the coat. He would not take the coat's protection at the cost of a boy's safety. He knew the difference in his bones, and the difference is everything. "Your Highness," he said, and it was the first word anyone had heard him speak all night, low and rough and urgent, meant only for the boy. "Your Highness, get behind me, please." And at the word Highness, the whole thing came apart. You could watch it travel through the crowd like a crack running through ice. Highness. The barefoot boy in the nightshirt was not some servant's runaway. That was the prince. That was Torin, the crown prince's own son, King Alaric's grandson, standing barefoot on the cold stone with a fair-day drunk stave over his head. The murmur went up and out and back. "Highness, the prince, that's the young prince," and it changed the color of everything. What had been sport curdled, in the space of 3 breaths, into something that could hang a man. Garrick's stole had gone the gray of old ash. The stave came down out of the air slowly, as if his arm had turned to wood along with it and clattered onto the stone. "I didn't," he started and stopped, because there was nothing on the far side of "I didn't" that would carry any weight at all. He had. Everyone had watched him do it. He looked at the club on the ground and at the small, furious prince and at the guardsman shielding him, and I watched the drink drain out of his face and the enormity of the thing flood in where it had been. And for one instant I almost pitied him, because there is no colder water in the world than the moment a man sobers all at once and sees clearly what his own hands were doing. "Pell," he said faintly. "Pell, we're—" But Pell was already off the plinth and shoving backward into the crowd, and Tobin with him, the two of them trying to fold themselves into the press of bodies and be no one, be anyone, be gone. The crowd did not let them fold in. The crowd had turned. The same townsfolk who had laughed 10 minutes before now closed shoulder to shoulder against the 3 of them with the particular hard righteousness of people who are ashamed of themselves and looking for somewhere to put it. Hands took hold of collars. Voices rose, not the loose jeering of before, but something with an edge on it. "Grab him, that's the young prince, you drunken dog. Hold them for the watch." And now, when it was over, when the danger had names on it and a crowd behind it, now the horns of the wall watch finally sounded, and boots came ringing across the forecourt, and the captain of the watch arrived at a dead run with 6 guardsmen at his back and his sword half drawn. He arrived, that is, in perfect time to see everything except the truth. Here is what the captain of the watch saw as he came pounding up to the lion gate. A guardsman off his post, out of his stance, his rifle hanging loose and disordered at his side, standing over a fallen wooden club with the king's own grandson, barefoot, in his nightshirt, plainly out of his bed without leave and plainly upset to the point of tears, pressed against him. He saw a torn strap on the guardsman's bearskin, and the boy's shawl trodden into the dirt, and a ring of shouting, grappling townsfolk. He saw 3 young men being seized by the mob. He saw, in one word, chaos at a royal gate, on his watch, with a child of the blood in the middle of it, and standing at the very heart of that chaos, plainly the cause of it to any eye that had not been there for the last quarter of an hour, one of his own guardsmen who had abandoned his post. I saw the captain's face and my stomach went to lead, because I have known Harrogate a long time, and I knew how this would be read by a frightened man who had to make it right in 10 seconds in front of a crowd. "Vale," the captain roared. "Off your post," the prince out of his bed and in the open. "What in God's name has happened here?" And before Doran could shape an answer, before the boy could, the captain did the thing that the sight in front of him demanded, and that was so terribly, exactly wrong. He gestured 2 of his men forward, and he said the words that would have ended everything. "Take him, take Vale. Get the prince inside and take that man off the wall." 2 guardsmen stepped toward Doran, and Doran, this is the part that undid me, Doran let them. He straightened. He handed off his rifle to the nearest man with the correct grip and the correct half-turn as though it were an ordinary relief at the change of the watch, and he lifted his chin and made himself ready to be marched off his father's post in disgrace in front of the whole town, without a word of protest, because his captain had given an order and a guardsman obeys. He would let them believe the worst of him. He would stand in a cold cell and answer for a thing he had not done, rather than argue with his own officer in front of a crowd and shame the coat a second way. I saw him decide it. I saw him fold the injustice into himself the way he had folded everything else all night, and go quiet and lift his chin. He got as far as 1 step. "No." It was the boy again, and if the first no had been a boundary stone, this one was a thrown gauntlet. Torin twisted out from behind Doran and planted himself in front of the two advancing guardsmen with his arms out, exactly as he had planted himself in front of the stave, and this time there were no tears in it at all. There was only fury, clean, towering, 11-year-old fury at a wrong being done in front of him for the second time in one night. "You will not take him," the boy said to the captain of his grandfather's watch. "You will not. He did nothing wrong, nothing. I saw all of it, I saw it from the window, I saw everything. And if you take him, you are as bad as they are, worse, because you have a sword and you should know better." His voice was climbing, but he did not let it break. "Those three have been tormenting him since the fountains were lit. They threw things at him. They poked him and pried at his mouth and tried to take his gun out of his hands, and he stood there and took all of it because your rules say he has to, and the only time he moved, the only time, was to push me out of the way when that one. He stabbed a finger at Garrick, swung a club at his head. He didn't leave his post to cause trouble. He left it to save me, and you want to arrest him for it." The captain stopped. He was not a stupid man, the captain. Hard, frightened, snap-quick to judge a scene, but not stupid, and not deaf to the king's grandson telling him plainly to his face that he had it backwards. Yet you must see the corner he was in, because it is the corner that made this the true test of the night. On one side stood the prince, a distraught, overtired child, out of his bed, who by every rule of the world might be shielding a favorite guardsman out of a soft heart and half a dream. On the other side stood three respectable men, a rich factor's son and his friends, well-dressed, tax-paying, exactly the sort of men a captain is trained to believe over a runaway soldier and a vendor's gossip. And already, even now, the three of them were finding their tongues. "Your Highness is mistaken," Garrick said, the wine gone out of him entirely now, replaced by something worse, the smooth quickness of a man of business who has seen the ledger going against him and means to cook it. "The boy is upset. Anyone can see it, and no wonder, but he has it turned around. We came up for the fair like everyone. This guardsman, he was rough with us, Captain, God's truth. He took against my friend Pell for no cause and laid hands on him. We were only trying to pull them apart, and the young prince came running into the middle of it before any of us knew he was there. We would never, a child of the blood, we'd sooner cut off our hands. It was the guard's doing. The guard lost his head. We're as shaken as you are." And Pell quick behind him. "It's true, Captain, on my mother. The man went for us like a mad dog, and Tobin, slower but nodding hard, went for us. Three grown men, sober now with fear, telling one clean lie in one voice. It is an ugly thing to watch, and it is more convincing than the truth almost every time, because the truth is a child in a nightshirt shaking with rage, and the lie is three prosperous men speaking calmly and in agreement. I felt the crowd waver. That is the thing they never tell you about a lie told boldly. It gives the frightened watchers permission to believe the easy thing, and half a crowd will always take that permission, because the easy thing lets them go home." The captain's eyes went from the boy to the three men and back, and I saw him begin, God forgive him, to lean toward the calm liars. So I stepped out from behind my brazier. I am nobody, a chestnut woman with scorched hands and 40 years at the gate, but I had eyes in my head the whole time and a voice in my throat, and I could not stand at my fire and let three cowards paint over the truth of that boy's courage with a lie. "That is a filthy falsehood," I said, loud as I have ever said anything, and I walked right up into the lamplight where they could all see me. "Captain, I have sold chestnuts at this gate since before that man was born, and I stood not 10 feet off the whole night through, and I will swear on any book you like to any court you name that the young prince has told you God's own truth to the letter. Those three baited that guardsman past all bearing. The fair one there flicked his strap and blew wine in his face and reached his fingers at the man's mouth. The sharp one grabbed his gun. And when that guardsman held on to his own weapon, as he is sworn to, that fair one snatched up a stave and came at his head, and the child threw himself in the way of it, and the guardsman pushed the child clear. Every word the boy said is true, and I saw it, and there are 50 souls in this yard who saw it too and are only holding their tongues because it is easier. Well, I'll not hold mine." And then a strange and beautiful thing happened, the thing that is the whole reason I still believe there is more good than bad packed into ordinary people. One by one, the 50 found their tongues. The woman who had pulled her husband back said, "She's right, I saw it, the boy's right." A carter said, "They'd been at him an hour, Captain, it were shameful." A young mother with a lantern said, "The little prince stood in front of the club, sir. I watched him do it, bless him. I thought my heart would stop." It went round the ring like the lanterns catching one from another. The truth passed hand to hand until it was too big and too bright for 3 liars to blow out. The crowd had been ashamed of its own laughing silence, and now it spent that shame the right way, all at once, on the side of a barefoot boy. The captain heard it. His face changed, and to his lasting credit, for a proud man who has half committed to a mistake in public is the hardest creature alive to turn, he turned. He lifted his hand, and the 2 guardsmen stepped back from Doran, and he looked at the 3 young men with a cold new light in his eye, and he opened his mouth to give a very different order. He did not get the chance to give it, because at that moment the crowd near the small door parted, and hushed, and stood aside, and through the gap came the one man in Harrogate whose arrival could make even Garrick Stoll forget to be afraid of the captain, because there was suddenly so very much more to be afraid of. The Crown Prince Rowan had come down to the gate, and a pace behind his son, leaning on his stick, his old face grim in the lamplight and his eyes already fixed on the small barefoot figure in the middle of it all, came King Alaric himself. Word travels fast up a palace stair. A footman had seen the young prince's empty bed, another had heard the horns, a third had carried the fright of it up 2 flights at a run, and the king, who did not sleep much any more, and who had been at his window with a cup of warm wine watching his own lanterns go up the hill, had come down himself, because a man does not send a servant to find out whether his grandson is safe. He came slower than his son, one hand on his stick and one on Rowan's arm, but he came, and the crowd went down before him like a field before wind, and the captain of the watch dropped to one knee on the cold stone, and even the 3 young men, whatever was left of their wits, understood at last exactly how far above their heads the roof had risen. The king's eyes found Torin, only Torin. For a moment the king of Eldermore did not look like a king at all. He looked like any grandfather who has been told his boy is in danger, and the 60 years and the crown and the stick all fell off him, and there was just an old man crossing a cold yard as fast as his legs would carry him toward a barefoot child. "Torin," his voice was not steady. "Torin, are you hurt? Look at me. Are you hurt?" "No, grandfather." The boy's fury had held all through the captain and the liars and the crowd, but it did not hold against the sight of his grandfather's frightened face. The tears he had been fighting all night came up at last, and his voice went small and wet. "No, I'm not hurt. Doran didn't let them hurt me. He put me behind him." "Please don't be angry with him, grandfather, please. None of it was his fault. I came down on my own. I climbed out and came down on my own, and it was my doing, not his, please, and it all spilled out of him in a rush. The window and the walnut and the flick strap and the fingers at the man's mouth and the stave and the pushing behind, the whole of it, told in a tumbling child's flood while the king held both his shoulders and listened, and the whole forecourt strained to hear. King Alaric listened to every word, and when the boy had run dry, the old man did a thing I will remember as long as I remember any of it. He did not scold. He did not snatch the child up and hurry him inside away from the ugliness, though every grandfather's nerve in him must have screamed too. He knelt slowly, painfully, one knee and then the other, down onto the cold stone in his nightrobe with his stick laid aside, until his old eyes were level with his grandson's, and he took the boy's face in both his hands. "Now you listen to me," he said low, but the yard was so still that it carried to the wall. "You listen because I am going to tell you the truth, and I want you to keep it your whole life. What you did tonight frightened me more than anything has frightened me in 20 years. You could have been killed. Do you understand me? A drunk man with a club and you a boy in your nightshirt, you could have been killed, and if you had been it would have broken your grandfather in half. His thumbs moved on the boy's wet cheeks. And it was the bravest thing I have seen a man do in the whole of my long reign, and I have seen brave men. You saw someone good being hurt, and you saw that no one else would stand for him, and you stood, barefoot, alone, against 3 grown men, because it was right. The old voice cracked. Never you dare do it again, and never you dare become the kind of man who wouldn't. Both of those at once, do you hear me? That is the whole art of it, both at once. And he gathered the boy in against his chest, there on the cold stone, and held him. And over the child's shoulder the king of Eldermore lifted his eyes, and now they were not soft at all, and turned them on Garrick Stole. I would not have wished to be the man those eyes fell on for all the grain in the realm. You, the king said. Garrick went down onto both knees so fast his cap fell off. Majesty, Majesty, I beg you, we were in drink. We never knew the boy for who he was. We never meant. You never knew the boy, the king repeated very quietly, and the quiet was worse than any shout. No, you thought he was a servant's child or a townsman's or no one at all, and so you thought it would not matter. That is the thing you have told me about yourself, and it is the only thing I needed to know. You would swing a club near a child you believed to be no one. You would torment a man for an hour because you believed he was no one, because he wore a coat that forbade him to answer you, and you called that his weakness and made sport of it. The king's hand found his stick, and he drew himself up off his knees, tall now, terrible now, the grandfather gone and the king entire. Let me teach you what that coat is, since your father never did. That man was not forbidden to answer you because he is weak. He was forbidden because he is trusted with the wall my grandchildren sleep behind, and a man the crown trusts with that does not brawl with drunkards at the gate, however they goad him, because if he did he would be no better than a drunkard himself, and the wall would be worth nothing. His stillness tonight was not less than your noise. It was 1,000 times more. He held the whole weight of his honor in his 2 hands for an hour rather than spill 1 drop of it on the likes of you, and the only thing on this earth that could make him set it down was a child in danger. You have shown me the worst that is in a man tonight, Garrick Stole. And he, the stick lifted and pointed at Doran Vale, has shown me the best. Look at him well. You will not see his equal again. Garrick Stole looked, because he could not do otherwise, and whatever he saw in Doran Vale's face, and Doran had come back to attention by then, straight as a mast, though his eyes were bright. It broke something in the young man that the whole hour of drunken swaggering had not touched. He put his forehead down against the cold stone and he wept. Not for himself, I think, though there was that in it too. I think, for the first time all night, he had seen the thing plainly and could not bear the shape of his own doing. The king did not gloat over him. That was never our king's way, and it is the reason men who would have died for his father would have died twice for him. He turned instead to the captain, who was still on 1 knee, and his voice went from thunder back to the flat weight of a man giving lawful orders. Captain, these 3 men are not for your cells tonight. Drunkards' cells are for drunkards, and this went past drink. They raised a weapon in a crowd where the children of this house were sleeping, and they lied to a king's officer to a king's face to bury it. That is for the magistrate, and it is for my sister. A murmur went round. Everyone in Eldermore knew what it meant when a matter went to the Princess Adela. The king's younger sister sat at the head of the household's courts and had a name from one end of the realm to the other for 2 things: that she could not be lied to twice, and that she weighed a man's whole self and not only his worst hour. Princess Adela will hear it in full and in the open, with every witness in this yard called to speak, this good woman among them. His eyes found me at my brazier, and I confess my old knees went weak, and she will render what is just, not what is cruel, just. Take them and hold them for her, and let no man lay a rough hand on them, for we are not the thing they were tonight. The guardsmen took the 3 away, and the crowd let them go with a silence heavier than any jeering. And I want to tell you now, so it does not sit ill in you through the rest of the telling, how that part ended, though it ended weeks later. Princess Adela heard it all, exactly as the king had said. Over 3 days, every witness called. She did not send those 3 young men to rot. She did something harder and wiser. She sentenced Garrick Stoll and his 2 friends to a year of service, real service, not a fine their father's coin could pay and forget, at the old soldier's almshouse below the hill, the home where the broken and aged of the king's own guard live out their last years. A year of carrying and washing and lifting men who could not lift themselves, and sitting with the ones who had no one, and listening, night after night, to what the coat had cost the men who wore it before them. Garrick Stoll went in sullen. I have it from the almshouse steward that he came out, a year on, a different creature entirely, that he wept at the bedside of an old guardsman he had come to love, and that he asked, when his year was done, to stay on and be paid to keep doing it, and did. The Princess Adela had not broken him. She had done the far greater thing. She had shown him what he might have thrown away, and let him spend a year learning to be worthy of not having thrown it. That is justice, when it is done by someone wise, and it is why I have never once in 40 years wished a different hand on Eldermore's courts than hers. But all of that was to come. Back at the gate on Lantern Eve, with the 3 led off and the crowd hushed and the boy still in the circle of his grandfather's arm, there remained the man himself. King Alaric turned to Doran Vale. For a moment the 2 of them only looked at one another, the old king and the young guardsman, and there did not seem to be words big enough for the king to reach for. Doran stood at rigid attention, eyes forward over the king's shoulder in the way of his training, because he did not know what else to do with himself under that gaze. He had been shamed and baited and nearly clubbed and wrongly seized all in one night, and now the king of the realm stood before him, and he could not tell, poor man, whether he was about to be praised or dismissed. And so he did the only safe thing and became a statue again. "Guardsman Vale," the king said. "Majesty," said Doran to the air over the king's shoulder. "Look at me, son." And Doran lowered his eyes to the king's face, breaking his forward stare a second time that night, and I saw that they were wet, that they had been wet for a while, and that he had been holding that too. "I knew your father," the king said quietly. "Aldous Vale went back into the fire the winter the stables burned, and he brought out my grooms, and he went back a 3rd time for a stable lad who was already dead, and he did not come out, because he could not know the boy was dead until he reached him, and Aldous Vale was not a man who would leave a child inside a fire on a chance. I have missed him for 20 years. I stood at his grave and I thought, there is a man the like of whom we will not raise again." The old eyes held the young man's. I was wrong, he raised one. Tonight I watched his son take an hour of shame that would have broken most men rather than fail his coat by an inch, and then throw the whole of that hard-kept honor to the ground in a single heartbeat, the instant a child needed the man beneath it more than the realm needed the statue. Your father would not have known which to be prouder of. Nor do I. You are your father's son, Doran Vale, root and branch, and there is no higher thing I know how to say to a man. And the king of Eldermore, in front of the whole hushed forecourt, let go of his stick, and put his hand up onto the shoulder of a common guardsman, and gripped it, the way a father grips a son, and Doran Vale, who had not spilled one drop of himself all night under every cruelty 3 drunk men could invent, put his gloved hand up over the king's old one, and bowed his head over it, and finally, quietly, wept. Nobody laughed at him for it. Nobody would ever laugh at Doran Vale again. They took the boy inside after that, of course. The Princess Alara had come down by then in a hastily thrown cloak with her hair loose, and the moment she saw her son whole and standing, she did what any mother would, half crushed him and half scolded him in one breath, kissing his hair and telling him she would have his hide, both at once, the way the king had said. She wrapped him in her cloak over the ruined nightshirt and lifted him up, though he was really too big to be lifted. And he let her, because even a boy who has stood down 3 drunk men is 11 years old at the bottom of it and wants his mother when the night is over. I watched them go up toward the warm light of the small door, the whole family close around the child, and I thought that was the end of what I would see, and I was glad enough of the ending. But the boy would not go in. Not yet. At the very threshold he squirmed round in his mother's arms and looked back down the forecourt, and he called out, clear again, that clear high voice that had cut across the whole gate, "Doran!" The guardsman turned. "You gave me my knight back," the boy called. "2 winters ago, you remember, in the mud. You told me a knight stands his ground and waits for his own." He wriggled to be set down, and his mother, understanding something, set him down, and he crossed back a few steps on his bare feet, holding out his small closed fist. "I kept it. I kept it the whole time, and tonight I stood my ground like you said, so you should have it now. A knight should have a knight." And he opened his hand, and held out the battered wooden knight with the worn-off shield, his oldest treasure, the thing he had carried to the window and gripped through the whole terrible hour, and offered it up to the man. Doran Vale went down on one knee on the stone, the way he had gone down once before for a lost and frightened child, and this time it was not to comfort a boy, but to receive something from a young lord who had grown, in the space of one night, into someone worth bowing to. He took the little wooden knight into his white glove as carefully as if it were the crown itself. "Your Highness," he said, and his rough voice was not steady, "I have stood this gate for 6 years, and my father stood it 30 before me, and I have never once been prouder of the coat than I am kneeling here in front of you. I will keep this by my heart every day I wear it, and I will tell you the same thing back that I told you in the mud, because you have earned the whole of it now, both halves." He closed his glove gently round the toy. "A knight stands his ground and waits for his own. And when he is grown, he stands it for others who cannot stand it for themselves. You did that tonight. You did the second half. You are the truest knight I have ever had the honor to guard." The boy threw his arms round the guardsman's neck, and the man let him, kneeling there in the lamplight with a child's arms round him and a child's toy in his fist, and if there was a dry eye left anywhere in that forecourt by then, I never found it. Certainly mine were not. I had to turn back to my brazier and pretend the smoke had got in them, and the smoke had not got in them, and every soul near me knew it, and not one of them said a word. There are 2 more small things from that night I should set down before I tell you the ceremony, because they belong to the truth of it, and because kindness deserves to be recorded as carefully as courage. The first is the captain. When the family had gone up and the crowd began to thin, that hard, proud officer, who had so nearly marched Doran off in chains on the strength of a wrong first look, walked over to where Doran stood collecting himself by the plinth, and he took off his own hat, which a captain does for no common guardsman, and he said, loud enough that those of us nearby could hear and carry it, "Vale." I had it backwards, and I said the order in front of the whole gate, so I will say this in front of them too. I was wrong about you, and I am sorry for it, and if you will have my hand, I would count it an honor. And Doran took the offered hand. He did not make the captain grovel, nor even let the moment stretch. He simply took the hand and said, "You saw a hard thing fast and had a boy of the blood to keep safe, sir. I would have read it the same. There's nothing to forgive." And the 2 of them stood a moment, hand in hand in the emptying yard, and something was mended that might in a lesser pair of men have festered for years. I have always thought it as fine a thing in its quiet way as anything else that happened, a proud man apologizing plainly, and a wronged man refusing to make him pay for it. That is how honorable men close a wound, and it is rarer than courage, and I wanted you to have it. The second is smaller still, and I did not see it myself. The Princess Ilara told it years after at a servant's wedding, when she had had a cup of wine and grown fond. She said that, when they finally got Torin up to his room that night and his mother had scolded and kissed him to a standstill, the Crown Prince Rowan sat on the edge of the boy's bed in the dark, and Torin, who had been so fierce and so brave all evening, finally cried, the ordinary bone-deep crying of an overtired child who has held himself together for far too long, and his father did not tell him to hush. He gathered the boy up and let him cry it out, and when it was spent he said only this, "You did right tonight. Everything in me wanted to be angry with you for the danger of it, and I will be tomorrow a little." But tonight I only want you to know that your father saw what you did, and your father is proud past any words he owns. Now sleep. Doran has the gate. He always will." And the boy slept. He told his own children when they were grown that he had never in his life slept so well as he did that night, knowing that the man he had defended was standing his post below the window, unbroken, because a boy had stood up for him. Those two things, the Mendied pride and the proud father in the dark, are the private half of it. The forecourt saw the rest. That was Lantern Eve at the Lion Gate. It would have been enough, all of it, to tell for a lifetime. But the King of Eldermore was not a man to let a thing so bright be remembered only by those who happened to be standing at one gate on one night. He meant the whole realm to have it. And so there came, 6 weeks later, the part that folk truly mean when they say the ending of this tale is one you do not forget. The king proclaimed a day of honor, and threw the great forecourt open, and near the whole of the lower town came up the hill for it. I among them, in my good shawl for once, with my brazier left cold at home, because the king had sent a page to my very door to say that the chestnut woman of the Lion Gate was to have a place at the front, by name. And I have never in my life been so proud of anything as I was of standing where that page put me. They had built a low dais before the palace steps, hung with the colors of the house of Harrowgate. The full royal guard was drawn up across the whole width of the forecourt in their ceremonial red, rank on rank of them, every bearskin level, every white glove still, 500 men who had made an art of not moving, the very discipline that 3 drunk fools had once mistaken for weakness, arrayed now in its full and breathtaking silence for all the town to see. And it struck me, looking at that unbroken red line, how badly Garrick Stowell had misread it on Lantern Eve. That stillness was not emptiness. It was 500 Doran Vales, each one holding the whole weight of his honor in his 2 hands, every hour of every day, so that children could sleep behind the wall. You only had to see them all together to understand it. You wondered how you had ever failed to. King Alaric came out onto the dais with the crown Prince Rowan at his side, and between them, small and scrubbed and solemn in a good blue coat, Prince Torin, who had been made for the day to stand where the whole realm could see him, and who plainly would rather have been anywhere else, and who bore it because his grandfather had asked it of him. And the king spoke to the gathered town, and he told them the whole of it plainly, keeping nothing back and dressing nothing up. The walnut, the flicked strap, the fingers at the guardsman's mouth, the grabbed rifle, the raised stave, and the barefoot boy who had come down alone. "I could stand my grandson here and praise his courage," the king said, "and it would be no more than the truth, and I have praised it, and I always will. But that is not chiefly why I have called you all up the hill. I have called you because of what my grandson's courage was for. He was not brave for its own sake, nor for glory, nor for himself. He was brave for a man who was not permitted to be brave back. He saw a good and faithful servant of this crown being shamed precisely because his faithfulness forbade him to answer. And where 500 grown souls in a crowd looked at their boots, one child understood that a goodness which cannot defend itself must be defended by someone else, or it is lost. That is the whole of civilization in a single sentence, and it took an 11-year-old to teach it to a forecourt full of his elders, myself among them. Then the king called Doran Vale forward. He came up onto the dais and knelt, and the king raised him from his common post to the household guard, the small and chosen body that stands nearest the family itself, and named him, by the king's own word, guardian of the young prince's own household, a station Doran would hold with quiet perfection for the rest of his years. And more than that, the king had a decoration struck for the occasion, a thing that had not existed before that day and has been Eldermore's highest honor for a guardsman ever since. A small silver oak leaf on a dark green ribbon, the leaf of the steadfast, given for honor held under provocation. He pinned the first one ever made over Doran Vale's heart, and beside it, so that the two touched, he pinned a second. And the second, the king told the hushed forecourt, was for Aldous Vale, 20 years in his grave, who had gone back into the fire a third time, that the father's honor and the son's should sit together on one breast where the whole realm could see that such men breed such men. I heard Doran's breath go at that. I do not think anyone had ever given his father anything but silence, and now his father had a green ribbon on his own living chest. And then came the thing I promised you, the thing that the children of the children who were there that day still ask to have told to them at bedtime, and that I have told more times than I have roasted chestnuts, and that I will tell you now as plainly as I can, though plain words are poor things to carry it. When Doran Vale stood, decorated, at the front of the dais, the king did not send him back to the ranks. Instead, the king turned to his grandson and held out his hand, and drew the boy forward to the very edge of the dais, out where the whole forecourt could see one small figure in a blue coat standing alone before 500 men. And the king stepped back and left him there, and there was a silence you could have laid your hand on. Then the captain of the guard, the same hard, honest man who had so nearly gotten it all wrong at the gate, and who had asked himself to be the one to give this command, drew his sword, and raised it, and in a voice that rang off the palace stone, he called out the order that no living soul in Eldermore had ever once heard given to a child. The guard will honor His Highness Prince Torin. And 500 men who had made a religion of stillness moved as one man. 500 right hands came up in one crack of white gloves. 500 bearskins bowed forward in a single wave down the whole red line, the deepest salute the royal guard of Eldermore gives, the one they give the coffin of a king. And they gave it, all of them together, to an 11-year-old boy who had come down barefoot in his nightshirt to stand between a good man and a raised club. The sound of it, 500 boots, 500 gloves, moving in one instant, went up off the stone and rolled out over the forecourt and over the wall and down the hill, and the whole town that packed that yard made a sound I have never heard a crowd make before or since. Not a cheer, something older and deeper than a cheer, the sound a great many people make at once when their hearts are too full to hold. And at the head of the line, nearest the dais, in the place of honor his king had just given him, stood Doran Vale, and Doran, saluting with the rest, was looking not forward in the way of his training but straight at the boy, straight into Torin's astonished face, and down that flawless red rank he was the one man openly, unashamedly weeping, the tears running down over his chin strap while his gloved hand held its perfect salute and did not waver by a hair. Both halves of the man, you see. Both at once. The iron discipline and the whole warm heart, held together in one saluting figure, exactly as they had been held together all his life, exactly as they had been held on Lantern Eve. The boy did not know what to do. How could he? No child was ever meant to stand where he was standing. And then Prince Torin, God keep him, did the one perfect thing, the thing that was the whole of his good heart in a single gesture. He did not puff up, and he did not shrink. He reached into his good blue coat, and he brought out the little wooden knight, for Doran had pressed it back into the boy's hand that same night, saying a knight should carry his own knight into whatever came next, that he had only wished to hold it long enough to know it was real. And Torin lifted that battered, paint-worn toy up over his head with both hands, up toward the saluting line, toward Doran. So the whole forecourt could see the shabby little wooden thing that a guardsman had once fished out of the mud for a frightened child, holding it up like a banner, giving them back, wordless, the answer to what they had given him. This is why, this small good thing between us, this is what it was all for. I have thought about it 1,000 nights since, that boy holding up his toy knight to 500 bowed men, and I have never found the bottom of it. I do not think there is a bottom. I think it is just true, all the way down. Doran Vale served the house of Harrogate for 30 more years, guardian of that prince and, in time, of that prince's own children, and he wore the leaf of the steadfast every day of it, his father's beside his own, and no man ever again mistook his stillness for anything but what it was. Prince Torin grew into exactly the king his grandfather prayed he would be, A man who could be both brave and kind at once, both halves, the whole art of it, and the wooden knight sat on his writing table the length of his reign, and sits there still, they say, worn down to bare grain now, its shield rubbed smooth, the most valuable thing in a palace full of gold. Garrick Stole grew old serving the men he had once mocked, and asked to be buried among them, and was. And the small silver oak leaf the king struck that day is still given, once in a great while, to a guardsman who holds his honor under provocation when it would be so much easier to let it go. And every one of them who receives it is told the story first, of the drunkards and the guard who would not break, and the barefoot boy who broke for him. As for me, I roasted chestnuts at the Lion Gate for 11 winters more until my hands gave out, and I told the story to every soul who bought a paper of nuts on a cold night, whether they asked for it or not. I am telling it to you now for the same reason. Not because of the drunk men. The world is full of drunk men and always was, and they are the least of it. I tell it because of what stood up to them. Because I saw, with my own 2 eyes on one cold lantern eve, the strongest man at the gate held fast by his honor, and the smallest person in the whole forecourt spend all the courage in his little body to defend a goodness that could not defend itself. And I saw a king kneel on cold stone to thank a child for it, and 500 silent men bow to a boy, and a toy knight lifted up over their heads like the truest crown in the realm. You do not forget a thing like that. I never have, I never will, and now, God willing, neither will you.